Slow down, sure. You don't want to spit it back up.
2 weeks, Anne. 2. Blackberries, raspberries, mulberries, blueberries, strawberries, pokeberries, cranberries.
You're a berry, aren't you?
I'm about to shit my lungs out, Anne. I need protein and starch. And thanks be to James, I shall be regular again.
I know where he is camped.
Thanks be to Queen Bodicea, we can hunt again.
I did not pinch these so that you could kill a few rats that you call mink. I'm tired of eating skunk and beaver. This is for hunting humans. We have to be strategic in picking off the men around the camp to get to James.
So I am to assassinate your husband?
Ex-husband, you idiot. We've half a dozen balls between us.
Oh, I guess that means we're the Roman Legion.
Not when the snow comes.
You're holding the balls and the grudge. Why don't you do it?
You're a better shot than I, sure. The thing is, you have to do it before sunrise.
What?
I told him I'd return before morning. He'll come for me. Us, if I don't return, sure.
I don't even know if this powder is dry enough.
So go outside and load and fire.
Then he'll know where we are.
He already knows where we are, you cockered codpiece.
But you just said you pinched these provisions and told him we had none.
Just feckin' do it.
I'm gonna kill that cock.
We'll have roasted chicken after you do your duty with James. Slow down. I don't want you to be so tit-faced you can't pull it off. Christ.
I have only killed in self-defense, and murder is not my specialty, truly. And I have no issue with James at all. At all.
We'll die here in this Arctic wasteland. Charlotte. Wait. Charlotte! I've changed my mind.
Captain Fitzpatrick.
Yes, what is it?
Someone's outside, Captain. Sounds like a woman.
Tis Charlotte Berry.
Ah, Charlotte. Do come in.
I was afraid you wouldn't come back. I did, my love.
James?
I followed your directions.
I see.
I found Captain Fitzpatrick's camp.
I heard nothing.
'Twas heavily fortified.
I called after you.
Did you? Why?
I was concerned for you.
Oh, you do have a heart of gold under that fickle exterior. I did not use shot.
How'd you do it?
Does it matter?
Yes. Knife? Poison? Rope?
Now is the hour of Our Lady Macbeth. I'm grateful that I have a mind of my own. I've been walking the forest all night. I am tired, and now I must sleep.
And what of James?
I am tired, Anne. I must sleep.
Charlotte, did you do it, did you?
I would be a fool to assassinate our only way out of here. I would have to kill the aide-de-camp and the other soldiers. 'Twas an ill-fated plan.
Then where were you?
I gave James his powder horn and his balls back. And in good faith, we had a nightcap of brandy, to which I assured him we would turn ourselves in the morning and hitch a ride on that ghost ship. Anne, come back to bed. Anne. There's a better plan. He's not terribly smart. We can outwit him. I assure you there are no ghosts or spirits on that vessel. I promise. I promise.